convened at 6 a.m. New York time. It was too late and it was going in the paper anyway. So unfortunately, that's the foibles of the Australian media.
So even as a private citizen, no longer a politician, let alone Prime Minister, you still don't have the ability to have your life treated privately or accurately?
Neither, and I'd understand some continuing public interest, but accuracy would be desirable.
Good idea. Look, we're going to be talking in some detail tonight about your Prime Ministership, what you see as your legacy. But before we do that, I think we want to get straight to the nitty-gritty of the subjects that I think all of us are desperate to hear you talk about. And the two big questions, I guess, the two big things that defined your Prime Ministership were, one, the way in which your party disposed of you on the 26th of June this year, and secondly, the disgraceful and sexist treatment that you had to endure at the hands of so many people in this country. And so we're going to talk about those two things first. So let's get straight into the 26th of June, that night, the night. A pretty close vote, 57 to 45, just a difference of 12, 7 votes in it. Were you surprised at the result?
Time I walked into the party room meeting, I'd known during the course of the day that I was in tremendous difficulty, and obviously you make the calls and you check your support, and it was increasingly clear to me. And I should say to Wayne Swan, who is in the audience tonight, I think it is fair to say, Wayne, isn't it? It was increasingly clear to us that we were in tremendous difficulty. So by the time we walked into the party room meeting, we knew it would be close, but that we were going to come out on the losing side of it.
So you really went down to the wire, though. You didn't know until you actually walked into the room?
Oh, we knew we were going to lose. It was a question of by how much.
I must have been, you must have felt pretty gutted. So many people that you would have regarded as rusted on Gillard supporters decided to switch sides?
I was in some people's decisions, but more than anything else, I was worried about what the whole thing said for the political. Yes, of course, you know, there's a range of personal emotions, there's some frustration, there's some anger. You know, we'd implemented really big reforms. I got into politics to change the country for the better. So, of course, I was hungry to do more of that and to have the opportunity to do more of it. So, yes, there was all of that swirl of emotions, but there was also this sense of what does it say about Labor culture? What does it say about the kind of political party we're going to be in the future? And so I quickly concluded after the meeting that the best thing I could do is accept that that was the judgment that had been made, and to give a gift of silence to the Labor Party during the course of the campaign, to do absolutely nothing. But once the campaign was over, I did just, once want to speak, hopefully forcefully, about what I thought about internal Labor culture, and I did that in the Guardian piece that I wrote.
What do you say to those people, and there still are people who say this, I've had people say this to me just in the last week, that you stabbed Kevin right in the back in June 2010, and what he did to you was basically just the reverse or the mirror image of what you'd done to him. How do you answer that accusation?
Look, I think that accusation sort of settled into the political narrative. Of course, my view of this is to ask your leader to have a leadership ballot. That's legitimate. To do things continuously that undermine the Labor Party and a Labor government, then of course that shouldn't be done by anyone. That's why I am not make it so difficult for a leadership ballot to occur. But I do think that it's great that there is a leadership ballot happening now that party members are getting a say in, and I think that that's, one spark of light that is revitalising our party culture.
So the key difference was that you asked for a ballot, he didn't?
I think the key difference is every day I was Deputy Prime Minister, I spent all of my time doing everything I could to have the Labor government prosper.
So what did, I mean, we all know now, you can no longer deny the truth of it. It's been extensively reported. Some of those involved have even talked about it. That you were, ruthlessly stalked for 3 years. You were undermined. You were denigrated by your colleagues in concert with some people in the media, and that there was an attempt to delegitimise your authority and your role, and ultimately that led to the circumstances which enabled the polls to provide the justification for what happened. I mean, how did you endure 3 years of that? If you're in a normal workplace, you've been told to go to the boss and say, listen, mate, I'm not going to put up with this. You can't do that when you're Prime Minister, can you?
Yeah. I'm not sure who I would have gone to. Maybe I could have gone to the Governor-General, in which case I probably wouldn't have said, listen, mate. I may have said, would Your Excellency consider, or something like that. Looking back on it, I mean, it was kind of, the perfect political storm. The perfect storm in the sense of emerging from the 2010 election with a minority government, which enabled a very hard-hitting opposition campaign to daily question the legitimacy of the government, and that is what the then opposition leader, Mr Abbott, and his team did. Then all of the theatrics that went with a minority parliament. I mean, in reality, it was a very productive parliament and a lot got done.
But we're going to come to some of that in a moment.
Yes, but because, you couldn't tell in advance exactly what was going to happen in the House of Representatives, this was endlessly fascinating and sort of breathlessly reported. And then you had the sort of wildcard element of gender, being the first female Prime Minister, and then internal instability in the Labor Party. So it all came together to create this very difficult environment. For me, you couldn't each and every day get up and say to yourself, gee, I wish I'd had a different hand of cards. I've been dealt the deck I've got, and so with the deck I've got, what's the best use I can make of it? And I think we very productively used the time that we had to create things that will endure. We didn't get everything right, and one of the things about not being there anymore is you have the luxury of time and perhaps sometimes the torture of time to, do the what-ifs and play out the alternate scenarios in your head. But I think given the degree of difficulty, whilst there are some things you are always going to think, I could have done that better, I could have done that differently, we just did get a lot done that is changing this nation for the better right now.
Well, speaking of what-ifs, that night that you drove to Government House to see Her Excellency and to recommend a new person be sworn in as Prime Minister, did it occur to you to recommend anyone but Kevin Rudd? There was some talk about the dog,
yes.
Ruben the dog.
I know that there are some of my former staff members in the audience tonight, and it is true that I did have a glass of red wine post the press.
Just the one?
At that point. Had a glass of red wine post the press conference before going to the Governor-General's, and there may have been some suggestions over that glass of red wine that Ruben, who, as people probably know, there is someone who tweets Ruben for PM, that we could have made that the most important Twitter account on the planet, but I stopped short of doing that and recommended Kevin. It's also true, Anne, that after the visit, I do need to acknowledge that there was much more
alcohol consumed. Not too many wowzers in the house tonight by the sound of it. Well, speaking about that night, I mean, probably, most of us had gone through what you'd just gone through and had been suffered that sort of comprehensive personal rejection, and suddenly you were no longer the Prime Minister. I mean, given all that, how most of us probably would have wanted to just bury ourselves in a bucket of whiskey or wine or whatever your poison is. But what you did that night was quite extraordinary. I just want to ask you how you found it in yourself to go into your office, which is what was going to be your office for another 10 minutes or something, and write that letter that you wrote to Joanne McCarthy. Joanne McCarthy, of course, for those in the audience who don't know, is the journalist from the Newcastle Herald who did all that incredible reporting of sexual abuse against children by the Catholic Church in the Hunter Valley region. And her reporting led to the Royal Commission. I mean, she had written to you apparently a few weeks before a handwritten letter. So what on earth made you think that night, of all the things in the world I've got to do before I leave the job, I'm going to write to Joanne?
Joanne had come to figure very prominently in my thinking. Not that we know each other well or that we've spent, oceans of time together, we haven't. But Sharon Grierson, who was then the member for Newcastle, was very much, a very good woman, very much in contact with Joanne, and, everything that was happening in Newcastle was at the forefront of my thinking as we decided to move to the stage of having a National Royal Commission. So, she'd been a real impetus for what I think will be a very profound change about how our nation thinks about keeping our children safe. And she'd sent me correspondence, and I wanted to answer it, and knew that if this wasn't the moment I answered it, then the moment was going to go by. If there'd been one thing I could have done in that moment which would have sealed everything about school funding, I would have done it too. If there had been one thing that could have meant that the National Disability Insurance Scheme was instantaneously rolled out, I would have done it, but those things weren't open to me. But it was open to me to make sure that I wrote back, and so I did.
Good on you. Let's talk now about Julia Gillard, Australia's first woman Prime Minister, and the treatment that you endured as a woman. In fact, just a week ago, speaking on British television, Kate Blanchett said, speaking about you, it was quite shocking the way she was treated as a woman. And I think all of us in this room probably, we know what was done, we know what was said about you, we know some of the horrible images. And I guess the question that I want to ask you, never had the chance to ask you before, is to what extent did you know about this stuff, or were you protected from your staff from seeing it, or were you aware of these gross email, Photoshop pictures of you, these horrible cartoons of you wearing dildos, these disgusting images that were everywhere all over the internet? Did you know about them?
Yes, I knew about them, but I also chose not to focus on them, and I think that was probably the healthier option.
But how did you feel? I know people who've said they cried seeing them, because they cried not just for you, but obviously for you, but also they cried for us, that we could have reached a level of political discourse in this country where it was okay to draw you, a woman, but you, the Prime Minister, in that way. I mean, it must have been very, very upsetting, surely.
I would have said more like murderous rage, really. And so for my personal liberty, it's probably a good thing that I didn't focus on them. I mean, and I do think, and at the end of the day, yes, it happened to me, but it's not, about me. It's about all of us, about women, and about